Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Free School Black Studies, the learning series. I'm Professor D. Boos, and I will be your learning facilitator and guide. This is the third of 6 weeks of lecture videos, and we are attempting to develop an understanding of Black studies through a study of liberation questions. And we arrive at these liberation questions by studying important figures of Black studies. Last week, we studied Malcolm X and his expressions of Black nationalism and its effects on Black liberation. This week, we turn to a new figure, and that figure is Kwame Ture, a man better known to some as Stokely Carmichael. And I think I have an image here for us to take a look at. There we are, Kwame Ture, right? Now, from his teenage years until his death at just 57 years old, Kwame Ture was a dedicated activist for fundamental social change. Indeed, Kwame Ture counted himself a political revolutionary for the African world. And our goal today is to trace in some broad strokes how Stokely Carmichael evolved from a civil rights student activist into the man named Kwame Ture, who came to advocate for revolutionary Pan-Africanism. And we're going to use our understanding of him in these broad strokes as a basis to be able to discuss some of the liberatory lessons that we can learn from his life and ideas on Thursday. Okay, so let us go to our roadmap here. In consideration of the political journey of Stokely Carmichael to Kwame Ture, we're going to make 3 stops, trying to be as brief as we can with each of them. The first stop we're going to make is to discuss how Carmichael started as a civil rights organizer and became a leading member of SNCC, Civil Rights Organization SNCC. Second, we're going to talk about Carmichael's popularization of the phrase Black Power, right? What's the context for that? Third, we're going to discuss how Carmichael pivoted to become the revolutionary Pan-Africanist Kwame Ture. All right. So those are our roadmap. That's our roadmap and the stops we're going to make here. But before I go further, I want to make a quick editorial remark. In my comments today, I will refer to Kwame Ture as Carmichael when I'm referring to him prior to 1979, as that was the year that he changed his name. And when I talk about him post 1979, I'll refer to him as Ture. All right. So just so you can follow along there. Now, I'm going to do something kind of interesting here, right? I'm going to start in 1966. In the summer of 1966, Stokely Carmichael shot to national and then international fame by famously popularizing a concept, Black Power. Now, this concept of Black Power had been percolating in the civil rights organization called SNCC. Right. And it had been percolating as that group was analyzing power relations and organizing in collaboration with local people in Black communities, especially in the South. They're organizing, trying to get civil rights, trying to get human rights respected in those communities. And so this concept is kind of percolating there. OK, and so why am I talking about Black Power now? Why am I talking about Black Power already, right? Because to speak about Black Power is to jump right in the middle of the story for Stokely Carmichael. Well, our slide here is a little bit of a clue as to why we start there. We start there because it is at this historical moment that Stokely Carmichael becomes most clearly identified as the potential heir of Malcolm X. Okay. All right. This is the historical moment. So things to note. Just like Malcolm, Stokely Carmichael was handsome, youthful, charming, but also sharply intelligent and an incredible public speaker. Carmichael could cut to the heart of an issue with a rhetorical style that clearly spoke to people, especially Black America. So I want us to consider a little clip here. This is a short clip of Carmichael, and he's giving a public address. So I'm going to play it here. Let's see if I can get it going.
Our problem has been, as black people, we've always been concerned about white America, never about us. And what we've always thought is that white America equal the same interest as us. That is not true. We must now be concerned with us. Let me give you some examples. We always want to prove what good Americans we are. The very first man to die for the War of Independence in this country was a black man named Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks. He was a fool. Because here he was dying for white folk freedom, and millions of his brothers were enslaved in the very country. Oh, but we wanted to prove what great Americans we were. We begged the white folk to let us fight in the War of Independence, and they said no. So we organized ourselves in bands of armies, training ourselves with our bare foot to prove to the white folk what great Americans we were. Please let us fight, white folk. And finally they came and inspected our troops and said, good niggers, you can fight. And they had us fighting the Indians. Like fools, we should have teamed up with the Indians and take care of you know
who. Okay, so we can see here in this very short address or excerpt of a longer address, we can see that he's a lively storyteller. And you can see that he has an impulse similar to Malcolm X to, quote, tell it like it is, make it plain, if you will. And you can hear how well the audience responds. And it is this person, this talented and charismatic man, who popularized the term Black Power, right? And it brings him into his historical moment. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but my point here is that the world comes to understand the political power of Carmichael when they see him as the heir of Malcolm X. But his actual political importance in the US Black freedom movement comes years before this. So let's move back in time before this moment to understand that history. So Stokely Carmichael was born in 1941 in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and he immigrated to New York City in 1952 when he was just a child. Right, so he grows up as a young child in New York. As a teenager, right, he's already showing interest in activist issues. Young Carmichael even had occasion to meet and learn from Bayard Rustin, who would later become famous for his civil rights activism alongside Dr. King. Carmichael also had opportunities to visit Harlem and hear from stepladder speakers like the Black nationalist Queen Mother Audley Moore. And Carmichael even regularly visited places like Louis Michaud's African Memorial Bookstore. And this was the same bookshop in Harlem that reserved space, street space, for Malcolm X to deliver his own stepladder speeches, to give you some texture of the kind of spaces that Carmichael could have been a part of, right? So he's coming from this cosmopolitan city. He's coming from a very good high school, a rich political community, and Carmichael is set up to flourish in college. And what college does he choose? His mom wants him to go to Harvard. He's not having that. He wants to go to Howard University down in Washington, D.C. So he chooses Howard University, right? And he arrives in the fall of 1960. And he arrives just months before the Greensboro Four conduct a sit-in and ignite a wave of direct student action, student protests. Now, recognizing this important development in action, a veteran organizer, Ella Baker, right, gets these students together, right, puts together a conference in Raleigh, North Carolina in April of 1960. And as a result of that conference, we get a new independent civil rights organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC for short. Very important development. Okay. Back at Howard, Carmichael is going to very quickly join NAG. He's looking for it. It's kind of like low key. It's not necessarily an official organization. So he finds the right people and he joins NAG. It is the local SNCC affiliate and gets to work and jumps right into the fray. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in 1961, he joins the Freedom Rides. Okay. So, he says in his memoir here, like so many events in the struggle, the rides began in considerable ambiguity and uncertainty. The most lasting consequence of the rides was the change that they would set in motion regarding the role and form of SNCC. In this way, the rides changed many lives, my own included. If you know anything about the Freedom Rides, you know that they were viciously attacked in Alabama. I have a photograph here on the screen of a firebombing that happened at Anniston, Alabama. And the Freedom Rides, just to clarify, so we're all on the same page, were a series of politically motivated bus rides of interracial riders. And it was designed to test whether the legal ban on segregation in the interstate travel, so traveling between state to state, those facilities between state to state on the highway, right? If the ban against segregation in those areas would actually be enforced or whether segregation was still going on. Okay, so they're going to test it. Okay, so they're going to ride an interracial group to see, right, if they're able to do it with no problem or not. Obviously, as you see from the screen, they had problems, right? In Mississippi, Carmichael is actually arrested and he is sentenced to serve 7 weeks in Mississippi's Parchman prison. Okay, nothing nice, right? But he does this the courage of his convictions, even as a young student, just entering. Okay, so he has this experience and he goes back to Howard and continues his activism in the small but mighty NAG group. And he recalled in his memoir that NAG had this strategy for their campus activism, and it was twofold, right? So on campus, their goal was to influence the student attitudes and political awareness. So this is other Howard students. They want to influence their attitudes, raise their political awareness to get them interested and wanting, desirous of participating in movements work. The second thing they want to do, and this is off campus, is they want to fight against the discrimination that exists in DC, and they want to fight against the blatant segregation that's happening nearby in Virginia and Maryland, right? They also want to put pressure on the nation's president and Congress. They're right there in Washington, DC. They want to be an active force pressing to change these things. Okay. And so these are some of the overt activism that NAG is involved in. They come up with some clever strategies for how to achieve their goals. NAG tried to influence student attitudes at Howard University by hosting debates, right? And one such debate was in 1961, and it featured Malcolm X and Bayard Rustin, which you can see here on the screen. By this time in 1961, Carmichael was very familiar with Bayard Rustin, right? He had been mentoring him from his time up in New York, right? And so, but here comes an opportunity for him to meet and learn from Malcolm X at Howard University. And it exposed Howard University students, the Howard student community in general, to political ideologies that would have been considered highly controversial and politically risky for the university leadership. So they have a debate, right? I mean, I shouldn't put the quotes. It was a real debate, right? A real debate, and then it gives folks the ability to hear from these various sides, right? Many years later, Kwame Ture recalls meeting Malcolm X at Howard University. And here's what he says. He says, "There Malcolm sat drinking coffee and answering our questions. And with every answer, his stock rose, as much because of his manner as his answers. He was unfailingly courteous, treating each questioner and his or her question with wit, care, and great respect, which put everyone at ease, only somewhat at ease, not entirely. Because at the same time, he always radiated a ripple of tension, a banked power, a quality of alert guarded watchfulness that really was like a great cat's, and everyone could feel it, right? So this is Ture reflecting years back on his experience of meeting Malcolm X at Howard University, right? Okay, let's move to the next slide. So over the course of Carmichael's years at Howard, he became even more politically active in the movement, spending summers of his sophomore year organizing in the Mississippi Delta. And it would be during times like this that Carmichael would come to know and work alongside, love courageous people like Fannie Lou Hamer. Okay. And in a few short years, Carmichael's intense civil rights activity turned him into a skilled political activist. And doing movement work in the South also deepened his organizing skills, right? So after graduation from Howard, he decided that he was going to go back into the Deep South. And he served as a district director in the Delta region for the historic and very tragic Freedom Summer Project, right? The project was an important effort to break a regime of violence in the state of Mississippi that upheld white supremacy and suppressed Black citizenship rights. The activist organizers aimed to break that regime by engaging in a broad campaign to educate and register Black voters and get voters to select candidates for an alternative party called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. However, 3 civil rights workers who were working on that project were murdered before the official project even began, right? They were missing for a while, but ultimately it was discovered that they had been murdered and brutally murdered. Yet the activists pressed on. And at the end of the summer, a political delegation, including Carmichael, tried to get the National Democratic Party to oust the racist Mississippi delegation, right? Because these are candidates who have been elected with the suppressed vote, right? And they say, no, hey, we've done this work to get these folks to be able to actually cast a vote. All right, we should go with this actually democratically elected group of people. And that would have been the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party candidates. But their efforts to persuade the National Democratic Party were unsuccessful. They were not able to do so. Ultimately, Carmichael's civil rights experience transformed this bright, excited student who had entered Howard University with lots of excitement into a serious, battle-tested freedom activist. Okay, so now that we have some important context about Carmichael, let's move to that moment of Black power, right? For this week in the syllabus, if you've been following along, I assigned an episode of the documentary Eyes on the Prize. And if you can remember back to it, there is an interesting narrative arc, right? Because what it does is it bridges the political importance of Malcolm X to Stokely Carmichael in the mid 1960s, right? Indeed, the episode picks up with Carmichael in SNCC midway through. The episode midway through, I should say. So the first half of the episode is about Malcolm X, but then the second half of the episode picks up with Carmichael in SNCC. And it picks him up about 1965 going into 1966, where he is pushing for Black voter registration, a voter registration drive in Lowndes County, Alabama. And in this effort, organizers and participants decided to give themselves a name. So they call themselves the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and they choose a symbol for themselves, and they choose the Black Panther. Okay. So they're doing important organizing work here in Alabama. But as we saw, SNCC and Carmichael have to temporarily shift their activism, right? So the documentary showing this here. They have to temporarily shift their activism from Alabama to Mississippi. And they have to do that because a fellow civil rights activist had been hurt. And that activist was James Meredith. So Meredith, by this time in 1966, was already famous. And he was famous for integrating the University of Mississippi in 1962. But in early June of 66, he was engaged in a protest action, a one-man march against fear, right? He planned to march across Mississippi, one-man march against fear. Unfortunately, he was attacked on the second day. He had really just got going, and he was shot down by white supremacists. So this happened on June 6th. So civil rights activists came out in force and across different organizations to pick up where Meredith had been stopped, right? They were going to keep on going because they weren't going to let a white supremacist stop their efforts to be able to be full citizens and enjoying all their rights in the society. Okay. So the civil rights organizations are going to show up. They're going to support, but they're also going to continue to push their own political aims. Okay. And it would be during this march in Greenwood, Mississippi, that the phrase Black Power and the person, Stokely Carmichael, would make the history books. So let's listen, because here we have Kwame Ture recalling some years later the development of Black Power. So let us listen to this.
To use the term Black Power, SNCC had already decided this before the march. That must be properly understood. We decided to use the march for an education purpose. Number one, we wanted to push strongly our struggle against the war in Vietnam. So if people will look clearly at the Meredith March, you will see anti-Vietnam propping up here. King wasn't using it then, but you will see this is one of the areas where we started to hit him with it seriously. Our march was to put strong nationalism in, to have direct leadership from us, and of course to throw out Black Power for the mass of the people. Now, I myself had been in Greenwood, Mississippi since early '60. I'd worked in the project there, and when head of the second congressional district, this was our base. So I had spent time in the jail in Greenwood so many times. The police knew me, the police chief knew me, everyone in the town knew me. So we decided Greenwood, it was SNCC's strongest base in the Delta. We couldn't go wrong. Unfortunately for the police, we went to set up some tents there, and the police decided to arrest me. Okay, so before I was arrested, we were discussing Greenwood. This is where we will launch Black Power. So when I got arrested, Ricks was on the side there when the police said, "Let them arrest you. We'll get you out of jail, and you come out and make the speech tonight." And he disappeared. Well, you know how Ricks speaks. So anyway, I went to jail. But I was brought out, and when I was released, it was at night, the speech was going on, and when I came to the speech, I was on the line. Ricks came back, he said, "We have everything prepared, we're ready for Black Power, we've spoke about it all day, we've primed up the people," and luckily for us, our biggest problem was Martin Luther King, because I knew that once Black Power was said, Martin Luther King would have to come, not fight against it, but would his best try to give reasonings to water it down. But luckily for us, the night in Greenwood, King had to go to do a taped television thing, I think, for Meet the Press. So he had to go to Memphis. So he was not there the night in Greenwood. Ricks had everybody primed. He said, "Just get to your speech. We're going against freedom now. We're going for Black Power. Don't hit too much on freedom now, but hit the need for power." So we built up on the need for power. And just when I got there, before I got it, Ricks was there saying, "Hit him now, hit him now." And I kept saying, "Give me time, give me time." When we finally got it and we dropped it, Black Power, of course, they had been primed and they responded immediately. But I myself, to be honest, I didn't expect that enthusiastic response. You know, and the enthusiastic response obviously not only shocked me, but gave me more energy to carry it on further. By the time we got down that night, SCLC was running around everywhere. We knew it was finished. We had made our victory. They could not bring it back. It was over.
Okay. So, one thing that you can see here, and I'd like to just highlight, is the organized and planned nature of the moment. So SNCC puts forward Black Power as a competing phrase to mark its own view of how Black freedom political struggle should be waged from that point forward, right? He's in a competition, right, with a King for influence, right? Not a hostile one, but a competition nonetheless for influence. And they have an idea about how they think that the political struggle should be waged. And this phrase is a way of pushing that forward. Now, the phrase immediately made Stokely Carmichael a household name in America because he scared a lot of people, right? And there are a lot of Black people who were empowered by this phrase, but there are also a lot of people, some Black people among them, right, who were afraid of this term and what it might mean. Now, despite the notoriety that came from the media, Carmichael did not back down, but he did offer more definition to the term. So let's go here. So in 1967, Carmichael wrote a book with political scientist Charles Hamilton, in which he explained Black power, writing this. He says this: Black power recognizes, it must recognize the ethnic basis of American politics, as well as the power-oriented nature of American politics. Black power therefore calls for Black people to consolidate behind their own so that they can bargain from a position of strength. But while we endorse the procedure of group solidarity and identity for the purpose of attaining certain goals in the body politic, this does not mean that Black people should strive for the same kind of rewards, that is, end results, obtained by the white society. The ultimate values and goals are not domination or exploitation of other groups, but rather an effective share in the total power of the society. All right. So we have Carmichael here and alongside Hamilton attempting to explain it as a tool, as a means to be able to get effective power in the society where, and in a context where Black people had been historically disempowered. So it's important to have that in mind. Okay, so Black power makes Carmichael famous nationally and then internationally overnight, right? And when fame found him, he was ready. He was a veteran activist, a sharp political thinker, a powerful speaker, as we've already seen. He was also chairman at this time of SNCC. And so he was constantly in demand for speaking engagements around the United States for community groups, college and universities, news reporters, even wealthy, curious liberals who, might donate to the cause and did donate to the cause. Okay. Now, notably in this time period, Carmichael is increasingly offering a radical critique of American society. Okay. He begins to cast Black America as an oppressed colony of people within the United States who were exploding in revolutionary rebellion. So, talks about like rebellions that happened in Harlem, right? Rebellions that happened in Watts, right? And there are later rebellions that happened in Detroit, right? So he's commenting on these things and framing them as revolutionary rebellion. And he's saying that because Black people are this oppressed colony of people, right, they would need to, in order to have real freedom, completely destroy and replace the American capitalist order. To get free, you must destroy or replace. In short, Carmichael is calling for a revolution, complete transformation of the society. Consider his statement that he made in 1967 in Cuba to the first conference of the Organization of Latin American Solidarity, because you will hear the radicalism in his language. Quote, "We are moving to control our African American communities as you are moving to wrest control of your countries, of the entire Latin continent, from the hands of foreign imperialist powers. There is only one course open to us. We must change North America so that the economy and politics of the country will be in the hands of the people. And our particular concern is our people, African Americans. But it is clear that a community based on the community ownership of all resources could not exist within the present capitalist framework." Right, so he's saying that it is a contradiction, right? The aims of Black freedom, the aims of a society for the end of imperialist power, right? Those things would be in conflict. So capitalism would have to go. That framework cannot exist. Okay, by 1967, Carmichael is not only speaking more radically, but he's also traveling extensively outside of the United States. Sorry, so that was Cuba, but he's also going to Canada, China, Algeria, various places in Europe, and very notably Guinea in West Africa. There, Shirley Graham Du Bois, the widow of W.E.B. Du Bois, but a force in her own right, introduced Carmichael to Kwame Nkrumah, who had been the president of Ghana and who had been ousted in a coup in 1966. Carmichael would also meet Sekou Toure, the first president of Guinea, as well as the exiled South African singer Miriam Makeba. Makeba would later become Carmichael's wife. Now, Sekou Toure and Kwame Nkrumah, but especially Kwame Nkrumah, would become major political influences on Carmichael. Carmichael would eventually change his name in honor of the two African leaders. Let's see what we got here. Okay, by 1968, Carmichael had lived many years with a grueling work pace, facing daily danger, imprisonment, surveillance, harassment. He had lost many friends and dear ones to death, including his mentor and friendly political competition, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And some of his former political comrades even turned adversary, right? So things were tough. Life as a superstar, political activist, organizer turned revolutionary amplified Carmichael's troubles. Ultimately, Carmichael left the US with wife Miriam to live in Conakry, Guinea in early 1969. However, Carmichael aimed to continue his fight from abroad. As a proponent of revolutionary Pan-Africanism in Guinea, Carmichael argued that all African people are one people, Pan-African. All African people are one people. Furthermore, Carmichael called on all African descended people to organize under the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which he framed as a political entity that could serve interests, right? Pursue revolution for the betterment of all African people. By 1970, on a visit to the US, Carmichael, who at this point had been living in Guinea, defended himself from characterizations that he had fled the Black freedom struggle in America when he left for Guinea. And Carmichael said this, quote, "Because revolutionary theories are based on historical analyses, one must study. One must understand one's history, and one must make the correct analysis. At the correct moment, you make your historical leap and carry the struggle forward. Not only that, you cannot rap if you don't really believe what you're saying or if you don't know the answers. 14 months ago, it became clear to me that the Black community was heading for political chaos. I knew I didn't have the answers, so it was silly for me to stay here and keep rapping about what I didn't know. Why should I stay here and get up on television and yell and a lot of nonsense? It would only cause confusion in my community, and I don't want to do that. Confusion is the enemy of revolution." Okay, so Stokely Carmichael becomes Kwame Ture in 1978. He never abandons his activism. He continues organizing with the All African People's Revolutionary Party until his untimely death from cancer in 1998. Now, as I said, broad strokes. We've done very, very broad strokes here, but the idea was to give us some understanding of his evolution from the civil rights organizer into the revolutionary activist, because the material that we have, the primary source material that we have are going to be analyzing for our discussion today doesn't give us quite this detail. And there's much to analyze in the life and activism of Kwame Ture. But what we're going to do is focus our upcoming discussion on wrestling with his political lessons. And so I'm going to open us up with a couple of key questions. What do you think is the current meaning of Black power? Right? It's a phrase that hasn't gone anywhere. What do you think is that current meaning of Black power? And why do you think Carmichael turned to revolutionary Pan-Africanism? What do you think are the prospects for it regarding Black freedom work? And lastly, why do you think at the end of Toure's life that he continued to implore people, Black people, to organize themselves? He would say African people, right? Why would he continue to employ African people to organize themselves? So these are the questions that we're going to get into on Thursday. I hope that you will be able to join us for that. And that's all I have for today. So until soon, each one teach one. Peace.